5. Connect the dots. Build digital preservation into your public records lifecycle. This will be a panel discussion facilitated by Lori Ashley, Principal Consultant at Turnsall Consulting, with the following panelists: Tanya Marshall, State Archivist and Chief Records Officer at the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, Kate Telford, Senior Digital Archivist at the Rhode Island Department of State, and Rebecca Davis, Archivist at the Limestone County Archives in Alabama. Thank you in advance to our panelists. Lori, we're happy that you're leading this, and we now invite you to take it away.
Thanks, Johnny. It's great to be with all of you. And let me share my screen and get going here. Okay. There we go. Are we all set?
Looks great.
Looks good.
Thanks. Okay. Well, thank you so much for hanging in there. It's been a fabulous forum, and I'm delighted to be with you for this final session. Connect the dots, build digital preservation into your public records lifecycle. So you saw these beautiful faces before, and you'll be hearing from them shortly, Kate and Tanya and Rebecca. So what we want to talk about is how do we link digital preservation capability into all the places where it's needed in the government sector. So, ISO tells us that there's lots of different approaches, but that we have to figure out systematic ways to do creation and capture and management of records in order for there to be evidence of business and to keep it for as long as needed. And you've heard about that all through this forum, the challenges, the opportunities, the strategies, and the tools that various folks are using in a very, very complex environment. And this is just an example of all the different places we know that government records exist, hundreds of applications that are constantly changing, and we recognize and understand that this is a moving target. And so the panelists today have figured out approaches, are managing some interesting twists on records management lifecycle, and so they're going to share their expertise with you in just a few moments. But I think I owe you an explanation as to why I'm here, and to just confirm that I've stepped back from a 4-year employment with Preservica back into my consultant role, which I was doing before I joined Preservica. And those of you who know me know I'm passionate about the topic of electronic records management and digital preservation, and have been, I guess, agitating in this space for a good long time. I joined Preservica because I really knew that I needed to dive deep into the technology that was supporting records management and archives to do what needed to be done for electronic records. And I came to that understanding while I was working in the utility industry, where operational records, not archival records, are very, very long-term in nature. And so what you see on the screen here are companies I've worked for, models I've developed, professional associations that I've been affiliated with, and it's been an amazing and wonderful journey. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning from all of you, and especially from our panelists today. So being at Preservica, I had the opportunity to expand on what I was doing, to understand where the requirements for digital preservation technology come from, what the users need, how they're dealing with the challenges. And what we can see is that while digital preservation has been a clear need for archivists for a good long time, the ball is moving, and it's moving upstream into environments where we need to capture sooner, or we can capture sooner in order to provide support for records and not have to wait until the end of a life cycle or a transfer to the archives. So these are some of the questions, and these come out of the universal ERM requirements that NARA's put together. And it's that maintain and use. So if you have a long-term or permanent record, are the records needing to live longer than the system in which they're currently stored? And in the last presentation, Deidre and Lauren did a great job of all the criteria and things that go into deciding where our records stored, what systems. But we do know that the technology refresh cycle is faster, oftentimes than the records retention cycle. And so do we have to move the records during their life cycle in order to provide adequate support and enable access over time? Will they be migrated? How will that be done? How will they be extracted? Will they need to be transformed? Where are they going? Who will need access to them? Will records be converted during their lifetime? There were some questions earlier today about, what file formats are you using to Robin? What are you taking in, or what are you telling users in your environments that they ought to be doing with records? And what about that all essential metadata, which Rebecca is going to share some insights, especially on that point. What is the environment that you're operating in? I think that if it's your own central IT, you're pretty well assured that the updates are happening, but is the integrity of the records being preserved? Where are they moving? And then someone mentioned third-party solutions and records stored in different places and across state lines. And so those are some of the other considerations. And then security and privacy and access control as the use for records changes over their life. Is this maintained? So these are just great questions, and they lead us to the conclusion that preservation will be needed for some government records long before they get to the archives, and maybe they'll never go to the archives. So what it's done at Preservica is to raise some of the issues and the requirements and the capabilities that are needed in a broader context than transfer to the archives. So these are just two examples. We have retention schedules, great retention schedules in government. They are the result of a great deal of collaboration. It's an art and a science. And these are two examples of typical things that you would see. Retain it in the agency or the department or the division until a certain disposition trigger, and then transfer to the archives for permanent retention. And in this case, the good news is that you've got people waiting at the end of the line of the operational use of the records to do the curation and to provide the context and to keep the original order and make sure the provenance and the authenticity are restored. The problem is that disposition trigger and transfer to state archives can happen many years, sometimes many decades after the records are created. And because digital records are dependent on this changing environment of hardware and software, it means that the archivist at the end may get sort of a big mess. And if you talk to your state archivist, you'll find out that that's indeed what happens. They get files for which the application is no longer available, and the issue of how do you render them and preserve them takes place. Another issue, and this is why we're moving into the records management realm, is that there are many permanent records that will never go to the archives because they stay within the record producing unit. And so this notion of digital preservation capability is one that's needed broadly in government, not just at the archives. Luckily, the archives are experts, and there are a great deal of folks like Kate and Tanya and Rebecca that are building the capability, that are advocating and educating their coworkers and their citizens about what's needed. But we still have a long way to go, and there are a lot of records inside producing systems that don't yet have preservation care and capability. So this is my personal argument that preservation is a disposition action, that in some cases, and we see this with Preservica customers, new Preservica customers who are preserving land records, real property records, which are basically born permanent in the United States, and vital records, marriage, death, and birth certificates, again, which are born permanent. So if they're born digital and born permanent, you would know from the get-go that these things will need preservation action over the life cycle. The question is when to take those preservation actions. How soon after capture or classification or indexing or recording is it possible to potentially move or copy these records into a repository or an environment where preservation can be done automatically at scale, and they'll be there forever. There are, of course, lots of examples, and Tanya's going to touch on some of these, where there are long-term records, indefinite or just long-term non-permanent records needed by agency staff that will also require preservation care. And then, of course, the common use cases that when retention is met in the operation environment, either they can be defensively disposed of or transferred to an archives. And so this session here is to talk about where can digital preservation technology, but more importantly, also the organizational requirements, the support, the resources, the experts like Kate and Tanya and Rebecca come to bear in the records lifecycle in a way that's different from our traditional when it gets to the hands, when it's transferred into the hands of the archivist. So today's session is about disposition is more than destruction or transferring the responsibility down the road. It's about thinking what actions need to happen in the records lifecycle, across the lifecycle, wherever those records may exist. I've heard a lot of talk about, oh, if we just, embed these rules and make it transparent to users, that will make it a low burden on them and the risk for the organization will come down. But I think we're going to need a lot more explicit, robust disposition actions to describe what's supposed to happen. That retention schedule didn't say anything about file formats or anything else that's supposed to happen along that records lifecycle. And then, we know in the archival community that digital fragility is a reality and that we use kind of a marker of 10 years. If it's already been in existence for 10 years, or if it's permanent information that's born electronically or converted to electronic format, then it may need care. So this community, especially this wonderful community of archives and records management practitioners, have such an important role to play in rationalizing and documenting and communicating and fighting for, I think, executable and defensible disposition triggers and actions in upstream record system so that government records can be preserved, can be readable and usable over long periods of time. So that's my soapbox. And thanks to Preservica for allowing me to be here today. I'm continuing to support them. Certain obligations like this one here, the Nagara Forum in the fall, was made before I left Preservica. So I'm standing by with them and working with my colleagues and supporting them in addition to doing some other consulting on the side. So now I want to turn this over to Kate from Rhode Island State Archives, who's going to tell us about web harvesting and preservation in near real time. Take it away, Kate.
Thank you so much, Lori. So, as many of you know, we had a historic event happen a little over a year ago here in the US when the pandemic started popping up in my state, which was late February, early March. It became clear very quickly that this was going to be a historic event and that all of the state executive agencies and elected officials were scrambling to do what they needed to do to guard public health. And so reaching out to them and asking that they transfer in real time records over to us was not going to be high on their priorities, understandably so. However, being able to capture and preserve those records that were being created in response to this historic event felt very, very important. And so it put us in an odd position where we were not waiting for records to be formally transferred into our holdings. Because this was such an unusual time and event, it became necessary in my mind to capture this documentation and worry about formal transfer at a later date, because in the meantime, as Lori was just commenting, records could be lost, records could be damaged, records could be modified. And, from the experience of all the archivists in Rhode Island, we know what researchers are generally asking for, what they are looking for, what historians are looking for. And so it was important to capture the full timeline of events and documentation and media that was being created. And so I, with my colleagues in Rhode Island, just started doing pretty much appraisal on the fly of things that were being posted online by our governor, by our Department of Health, by our General Assembly, so on and so forth. Some of that was guided by our current records retention schedules. So things that were permanent records already identified, such as executive orders, rules and regulations, things like that. We already knew those were going to be permanent records, so we should be capturing those as they were released. But luckily, Preservica also jumped in very quickly and very early on to offer to their users additional storage for these specific records, which made it possible for me to expand the net, to capture a wider variety of information that was being provided to the public. So, while we're determining what's of historic value, it became clear that that's not those weren't decisions that were necessarily going to be able to be made in the moment. So it was better for me to capture and preserve everything I could get my hands on, and then worry later about, appraisal. And again, because of Preservica's proactive approach to their users in that moment, that was possible. So then it became a matter of, okay, capture as much as possible, but it was happening in real time. So I was learning in real time how to do the web capture and ingest to capture, for instance, our Department of Health's website on, a automated basis, which is still happening. To capture all of the press conferences that at one point were happening daily and were being televised originally just through Facebook Live. And so to figure out how to get those videos out of Facebook and into Preservica in a format that could be, authenticated and preserved. And then how to present this material to the public. And luckily, again, because we're using a system that is somewhat flexible on how it presents on the public side of things, I could ingest things into our COVID collection and place them the way we do according to our record group. So by creating agency and subseries therein. But the public doesn't necessarily look for records that way, as we all know. How we kind of organize and think about our records is not necessarily how the public is expecting to find them. So because Preservica has the ability to have a file represented in several areas through links, I was able to create things like a timeline where you could, go through starting in February of 2020 and see by date chronologically what was being released statewide throughout the pandemic, whether it was Department of Health videos, whether it was guidance documents from our Division of Taxation. Like I said, the press conferences, I was capturing our COVID level our COVID data at the state level on a weekly basis, executive orders, podcasts. We have a program in the state that allows that our Rhode Island state troopers go to elementary schools and read to the students. That wasn't possible, so they were doing it online. So I captured those videos, things like that. It was a bit of a scramble in the spring of 2020. For better or worse, it has become just part of my weekly routine at this point to scan the websites that I know of and grab the new material. But it was also, a quick learning experience for me to learn all of the tools that are, provided as part of Preservica, such as the ability to capture those websites. I worked with Preservica on their Twitter beta testing because that was something we identified early on, that a lot of the information that was being communicated to the public was being communicated through these social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter that have their own terms of service, they're proprietary. And how do we capture what are public records on a private platform? So those are all still conversations that are ongoing, but they're all conversations that I think are very important based on what we've seen in the last year and a half. So that's about it for me.
Thanks, Kate. I think there's nothing like a good emergency that to be innovative and responsive and solve a problem and figure out how to use software. So thank you for sharing that. I've heard you speak about this a couple times, and I remember when we just spoke recently how you expressed a desire that sometime you're going to be able to stop.
I can't wait till I stop creating the COVID collection. because of that timeline that I spoke of, every month I have to add a new folder for a new month. And I did not think I was going to be adding a November 2021 folder, but here we go.
Here we are, and
Here we are.
we'll
So,
just keep on going.
for anybody who's interested in seeing, what I've captured and how I'm presenting it, the link to our Preservica instance is provided on the screen, and you can see right above that link is basically the home page, and those are the main categories I've got things sorted into at this time. But it's constantly evolving.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kate. Really appreciate it. So Kate mentioned Twitter capture, and so I'm going to represent a capability that's coming in Preservica software that's in the latest release. Just share a little bit with you. So Kate mentioned that especially public sector users, Preservica users, shared that they need the capability to capture and manage and preserve social media as official government records. And we know that can be challenging. And so the way that Preservica works is to take feedback from its customers, and then it figures out what's going to make it into the product roadmap, and Twitter capture and preservation was one of the things. And there's been a concentrated development effort over the last year or so. So as Kate mentioned, last summer, there was a beta test group. So that's where customers come together, they share what they need, Preservica builds something, and then they pound on it and test it and give feedback. And so one of the other members of the group was Marta Crilly, who's the archivist at the Boston City Archives. And this is her use case, that the City of Boston Archives needs to preserve public social media records. They need to be readable into perpetuity. And so because they have Preservica, they're able to use their preservation solution. So you can see down below the Massachusetts State Retention Schedule, which gives you the mandate to go off and get things regardless of where they're stored. So elected officials, other agencies or departments, and then she mentioned that sometimes there will be topic-specific accounts, I guess especially through this COVID period, that would be candidates for capturing. And so Marta gave permission to use Mayor Marty Walsh's Twitter account. And so there's a little bit of a demo here, and I'm going to walk you through what you're seeing. And as I said, it's just come out in the latest release of Preservica. And so Kate, will look forward to your feedback on that. So let me start the video here and describe what you're seeing. So Mayor Walsh resigned in March of 2021 because he went to become the Secretary of Labor in President Biden's account. So what you see here is his Twitter account. It's made of lots of different objects, videos, text, images. So here's a specific tweet about the reopening of city facilities. And you can see that there are images and a link to an external website. And so automating the capture of this, like Kate described in automating the capture of web harvesting, would allow an archivist to focus on curation, accessibility, classification. So let's go look at it in the Preservica repository. This is just a demonstration instance. So there are some different folders, different types of government records. So if we navigate to the COVID-19 collection and then to the Twitter subfolder, you can see a number of tweets that have been captured. And this capture you can set to do automatically at predefined intervals, and it will just happen. So if we use a keyword search using the word phrase 4, which appeared in the body of the tweet, it brings up this result. We're now looking into the Preservica repository. By opening it, you can see the metadata that was captured, including fixity, the timestamp information, as well as unique data from Twitter, such as likes and replies and tweet ID. And you can see that for this collection, the Dublin core schema is being used, which is one of the ones that comes in Preservica out of the box. So by clicking on view, the entire tweet is rendered in an easy to read format with all the components that we saw before in the Twitter feed. So here are the images. And then the link is also accessible. So this release will allow you to scroll through the related tweets. You can track conversations and obtain more of the context. So this is multiple individual assets collated together automatically, but still independent enough so that each component can always have its authenticity verified and migrated to the latest format. So in the Advanced tab here in Preservica, you can see that the Twitter object's made up of multiple assets, which include a JSTOR and 3 JPEG images. So now that the tweet's in the repository and preserved, let's take a look through universal access at the portal to see what the user experience would be. So this access portal has not been customized. It's very, very generic, but obviously it can be customized by users. And the archivist has full control over what's seen by the public and which is kept private. So here in the government archive collection, we saw the repository. Let's assume someone wants to explore the growing City of Boston COVID-19 collection. And the search pulls back the folder and 3 items related to the search term. So there's the tweet, a website, and a PDF. So here's how the tweet is rendering in universal access. So this would be the, any citizen's experience if they wanted to see what was in Mayor Walsh's tweet. Here's the website. That you saw before. And then finally, here is a PDF of council meeting minutes that are related to the topic. And it was captured and ingested automatically into Preservica using the SharePoint connector. So there you have 3 separate assets related to a single search term, which includes the tweet made up of multiple files, a website, and the PDF. So let me move on. So, this is the value to MARTA is by using full text search, she can, or the records manager, or anyone else in the city or the citizens can find social media records, but also all the things that are associated with it. And interestingly, what MARTA explained in the City of Boston is that Mayor Walsh resigned to take a cabinet position. There is currently an interim mayor, but there's also an election happening next Tuesday. So in a very, very short period of time, there will actually be 3 mayor Twitter accounts that may need to be preserved as records. And one of the things she mentioned was that, the IT folks are moving along. Administration changes, you all know very well, create quite a bit of work. And sometimes things get shifted and lost. So she was glad to hear that this capability is coming. And she identified about 5 accounts that she thought probably would be in the first wave of capture by the city. So that is what's coming. It's another example of what we need to preserve sooner rather than later. But now I want to turn this over to Tanya Marshall from Vermont, who's going to give us a really great vision of where she sees preservation fitting into the records life cycle. And now, how do I pass this over to you?
I'm going to request controls from you, Lori, and we'll see if that works out.
Excellent. That's easy.
All right, let's see. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Lori, for having me. I'm going to talk about some strategies that we've done in the state of Vermont across a long period of time, actually, which I think should be reassuring to people that it does take a long time, and sometimes your strategies work out. Sometimes you have to evolve and move with them. Let me see. Now it's not saying that I have controls. Oh, there it goes. It's just a delay on it. So just some background for what we have is that we have a number of different statutory responsibilities, and about in 2018, the legislature of the Vermont General Assembly added that we are responsible for ensuring low-cost, secure repositories and systems for public records, regardless of format, and that they have to be available at the enterprise and statewide level, and that they also have to be managed and operated in a manner that supports compliance with not only the Public Records Act and our own internal legal requirements, but also generally accepted record-keeping principles, industry standards, such as different ISO standards, best practices, that's for archives and records management, and obviously the legal requirements around the records themselves. This was part of our strategy of building in, we oversee a state record center, we oversee the state archives, including the digital archives, but we don't oversee the enterprise systems such as Microsoft 365 or other large platforms like OnBase. So this was one strategy that we had to start connecting those dots and making sure that we're continuing to be relevant and also on top of the different requirements that we're seeing our public agencies need. Hitting the button, I think there's just a little delay. So it's just some background that we have I've actually been with, we've been part of this Preservica instance for a decade now, when it was originally piloted as part of a federally funded program for NDIP that was spearheaded by Minnesota State Archives a little bit earlier. I think 2007 is when we started. In 2011, we began piloting what was a safety deposit box from Tesla, which Preservica is kind of born from. We developed our first proof of concepts in 2012 and 2013. And then when Preservica came onto market, we one of the goals of that NDIP project was to have something that state archives like ourselves could have a low cost entry point. And so we did those earlier ones about 6 years ago. And then in 2018, we were able to establish not only the need, but the ability to budget and have show why we moved into Preservica's enterprise private cloud. So that is what we're using right now. To give you an idea too of why we're wanting to move to a lot more integration. And I press, let me see if it's gonna go or not. All right, there's just like a delay for some reason. Get to the next slide. Lori, I might just give you back controls and see if you can move on to the next slide for me.
Is that the one?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'll just let you know.
Okay.
But the next 12 months, right now we have about 3 terabytes, which isn't too much. And within the next 12 months, so we're expecting 6 terabytes coming from the General Assembly. This is moving to COVID. They went from audio. We always receive the audio, and that is a lot of our content right now to YouTube, Zoom meetings and recordings and video, which just grew the size of their records and the volume tremendously. And so we're looking to see what they're going to be starting in January, if they're going to keep with that format. So we're seeing in the next 12 months that, here we have 2.8 and we're already knowing that 6 is on the table. It's really just a bandwidth, a download access issue right now that's keeping us from moving them into to getting them from the General Assembly. We also have a number of committee records that are coming in that we're receiving a lot more requests from agencies and departments of saying, and the General Assembly and the judiciary, how can you capture things and automate the capture of our records to make sure that they're preserved and accessed? We're also moving, I'm underneath the Secretary of State's office, so we're doing a huge crawl of servers, expecting at least 1 terabyte. A lot of our things are in business applications, which I'll get to in a minute. And then we do have a protocol for when we digitize records and we make the decision to have digitized records into Preserve. So you can see this huge jump, and this is just 12 months, and a lot of our stuff is still a manual process. Lori, can you move to the next slide, please? So the goals that we've had have been to automate transfer and born digital records into VT Retain, which is what we call our instance for that. And we actually started planning for that in 2008. All our record schedules include a record keeping metadata that is compliant with the ISO standard 23081. And that's also been one of our goals on archives description, which I'll get to in a minute. So all of our schedules have carried this certain metadata that if someone is using an enterprise system or if there is a business system that's developed in the state of Vermont, we have just a few core metadata expectations on those records, and that has been established now since 2008. So the goal was there that it would actually facilitate the retention and disposition of records in those systems, and that it would help us in the future automate the transfer of digital archives records into from those systems into the state archives. Lori, can you move to the next slide, please? So our second goal, which is getting closer and closer, is to establish the digital archives as the actual point of what I call in-place preservation. So we may not actually take custody of them yet, nor do we want to take custody of them yet. We're responsible for public records requests and so forth. So it's a lot to take on 3 branches of state government because we do service all 3. But that records that either have not yet met their retention, so they wouldn't necessarily be eligible for transfer yet, but we could actually begin storing them. And I put a note on here, our opportunities shift. And so depending on what's happening with certain RFPs at any given time, or what is happening with, there's different election cycles. So maybe something's on the table and some staffing has changed. Maybe there's, in this case, COVID. puts a lot of the things on that. But we are currently working with a number of not only our General Assembly, but also in the executive branch and also our own office to begin the automation component. So that's pretty exciting. We will have an RFP out fairly soon with which actually just came up in conversation yesterday, which will be the first time we'll see that the requirement there is to integrate with our digital preservation system, and the records filing and their permanent records will actually be filed directly into Preservica if this is successful for us. So goal 3. So goal 3 is that our record keeping metadata was initiated as part of our archival, our description metadata, which has been really significant for us, because if you think about all these terabytes and petabytes, like all the things that we're going to be getting, we're not going to have the capability at all to to get into each record and describe it. So we've been really focused on electronic records and how to do that and make it most efficient for us. We're really small staff here, as most archives are, and we would never get out of processing in terms of electronic and digital records. So part of this integration is that we have the Vermont Functional Classification System, which means it's how we do our appraisal and our analysis of legal requirements to make that determination of archival, but it also carries descriptive that is aligned with exactly what we're asking the agencies and departments to incorporate for the record keeping metadata. And those areas are, the big, 4 or 5 that we focus on is, the actual name of the agency, and we set the standard and how it's defined and use that. We also do a lot on ours is a functional analysis and a functions-based approach. So you can have a lot of agencies over time that do the same function. It's just that it's been transferred or through reorganization. So it gives our users the ability to look across time. And so if they're coming to us and doing searching on certain sets of records, they don't always need to know which agency has done it at any given time for a function. We do a lot on transaction types. So this is the types of records that come in. And then we focus on the combination of legislation. We were very tied into the Public Records Act and making sure that our agencies are meeting their legal requirements and don't create liabilities for themselves, and that they're able to demonstrate that they have the records that they need when they're requested or when they need to provide a service. And then 2 other areas that we add now is that Secretary of State's office in Vermont is responsible for jurisdictions, which means that when a municipality is created or a district or some entity of government is created, we do have to record that and have that information. And now we're tying that that master metadata set into our records too. So if something has this place space, it's going to have that information, and then obviously people that come up in every set of records. So now it's just an integration component. So if it's in a business system or an application in the state and it has the core metadata that we need, our goal is to have it actually travel and become the archival description that we'll need as we automate this process. And Lori, can you switch to the next slide, please? So just in terms of, just a recap of some of the goals, we are charged by statute in making sure that we're meeting generally accepted record keeping principles. Everything that we do for our program has to align with that, and also has to align with industry standards and best practices. That it's not something that the legislature it's actually something we put in for ourselves. And that's been one of the strategies that has really helped us with this goal, because it's not just us asking as archivists or as records and information managers, but it's us showing that there's actually a larger community that's broader than Vermont and bigger than even the United States that's actively working in this direction. And so when we align it to, we use a lot for the information governance components. So that's why you'll see these highlighted areas, but we focus everything around the generally accepted record keeping principles. And this has helped us really demonstrate the value of that to the state of Vermont, and also the value of thinking about preservation very early in the life cycle. And, even the call I received yesterday, it's so nice to see after all these years of working on this effort, is to have, now we have attorneys and we have different records officers who maybe his duty is otherwise assigned in the state, who are contacting us and saying, I know this is a need, we see this. We're actually benefiting from this program in terms of the statewide records and information management program. We want to be part of the bigger picture. And we're seeing that really we really have a tipping point that happened fairly recently where we were largely paper-based about 10 years ago, and now we're not. So this has been a huge aspect for our preserving, what I call preserving the enterprise. Lori, can you switch to the next slide? And just last but not least, obviously the portion of partnerships. Can't do this all in a vacuum at all. One of our partners has long been Preservica. We're currently piloting, we're Microsoft State, so we're active in Microsoft 365, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, email, obviously. So we've been actually working on a pilot, which I think Lori's going to touch on, that is about automating that transfer directly from Microsoft 365 applications, beginning with SharePoint, and that's been going very well. It's something that's called P365. But also within the state, we have built up in the last 5 or 6 years interdisciplinary steering committees related to records and information management, and we request that they have legal and business and records and IT representation at those meetings, and those steering committees have really grown. One of them, the Agency of Human Services, received an award from Nagara last summer for their work, and it's been really nice to see people recognizing how we all have to collaborate together. The state CIO's office is the Agency of Digital Services. They're the ones that do stand up the other platforms and the systems that we don't have direct responsibility in integrating our shared services. So we're actively working with them. We're doing some big projects there. And to kind of take the burden off of them too, of what are the controls that need to facilitate this. We're working with General Assembly, huge constituent of ours when it comes to preservation, and some of that YouTube, but we're looking at how can we improve that process and actually get it in real time. And then our Vermont Judiciary just moved to a large platform case management system that just went fully live about 6 months ago for every single court in the state. We do have state courts. We don't have any county or local government courts. So we're the state archives for them. And so we're working on a case file lifecycle management, to which the records will actually be moved after the case is disposed into digital archives. So we have a lot of exciting things. And I think the key part is that it takes patience. If you told me maybe 10 years ago that it might take so long for that, but it's really about these partnerships, I think, at the end that make the most difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. I would say patience and leadership, and that's clearly what you demonstrate. And we saw session 3 was your team demonstrating what they had done in the pilot to start to get stuff into the Preservica repository, and did a great job of answering questions. So Vermont has rendered a great service today to the Nagara community in both your vision and in your practical approach. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So just a word to follow up on Tanya. As she said, Preservica identified through its users and just the world going to Microsoft 365 that there was going to be a need and an opportunity to integrate preservation into Microsoft 365. So, Microsoft has a lot going on. There are many, many users. A lot of content from shared servers and other applications is being migrated into the Microsoft 365 platform, which could be a records manager and archivist's worst nightmare, but hopefully some things that are coming will make that a more intelligent platform. Microsoft is embracing some of the content management, records management capabilities in their policy center that we've all been waiting for to be able to control these assets in a way that controls them across the life cycle. So what's going on with Preservica is, this understanding that there's a lot of content in these systems. Some of them are records, not all. And then where is the high value content, the content that needs to be preserved and archived and maintained over long periods of time. So this is the sweet spot that Preservica is trying to address in P365. And as Tanya said, there's currently a beta test going on with some of the customers to look at what the capabilities are. Our assets, do they need to be moved or copied? What's going on in the end user? And what's going on for the archivist? How can the control and policy in the Microsoft environment be leveraged to get the right things to happen across the life cycle for records and archives? So this is Preservica's role in P365, is to try to reduce some of the risk of the content in the Microsoft environment that has these requirements for chain of custody and metadata management and integration, lifecycle control, dealing with the file format obsolescence, which of course is the, the magic sauce in Preservica does that. But also, as Tanya's identified, do this at enterprise scale, because you folks are sitting on massive enterprise systems that have lots and lots of content that needs to be managed. And so Preservica is looking at this at the high end of the enterprise and looking for ways to make this seamless and transparent, efficient, and systematic. And so this is what they're working on. And then, the idea will be, users can be active, or it can happen transparently. And it can be either manual, semi-automated, or fully automated. But the idea is to bring preservation right into the Microsoft 365 environment, so that all the good things that the Nagarro community cares about for government records and evidence are taken care of and possible at scale. So our final presentation is Rebecca Davis, who hopefully you folks all know as former Nagarro president. And she is going to talk about how she's enhancing the discovery of records that have made it to the Limestone County Archives. So
awesome. Thank you. Okay. There we go. Now I can share my screen.
yeah.
Let's see, entire screen. Okay, I don't have slides. It's the last session of the day. Y'all have already probably gotten your, drinking games. Take a shot every time you hear Lifecycle. So we're just gonna have fun with this last one, and then we'll call it a weekend. All right, share my screen. So what I'm gonna do is just sort of walk y'all through the what it looks like for us here at the Limestone County Archives. Just a quick introduction to Limestone County. This is our website, limestonearchives.com, or the longer version there. And so Limestone County was established in 1818 in North Alabama. The Limestone County Archives has Limestone County government records going back to 1818. And we also have quite a bit of non-government records too. We're just basically the repository for all of Limestone County history. And but the government records we have are permanent records. We have an older system I won't go through right here, where a lot of our government records are still digitized, and a master index to search those. These are our different sections of the website. But what I want to focus on is the digital archives. And we're actually working to kind of migrate government records over there. But I want to spend a little bit more time just showing how we are trying to make this just as user-friendly as possible for our users. So this is powered by Starter by Preservica. We had the wonderful opportunity to beta test the Starter software and help kind of shape it, I guess you would say, but also just to be able to use it, which was fantastic, because we had never, this is a small shop. There's two of us here, archivist and assistant archivist. We had never, I'm only the third archivist that's ever been here in 41 years, and none of us have ever been trained as archivists. So we're just bumping along by the seat of our pants, and we never had really had any sort of real content management system. So whereas I think it's wonderful that this software offers so many opportunities to bring in your CSV files and that type of thing, for us, it was just really starting from scratch. That's why I'm really excited about like the bulk metadata editing and so on that's available. Because like just today, while I was watching the forum, I just pulled in fact, I'll just go ahead and show you. Into our special collections, I just pulled in over 1,000 African-American funeral programs, and so many that the metadata has not even had a chance to all populate yet. But this is something that we've been working on and collecting to assist with African-American history and genealogy for years. And now we finally have these online and accessible. Yeah, the metadata hasn't populated yet, but these are usually really great sources you can see of history, genealogy, and so on, particularly for African Americans, where oftentimes that history is hard to find. So but to kind of tell you a little bit about who might be using this. So as a county archives, a lot of what we get are genealogy researchers. However, as the local history repository, a lot of what we get are just people who are interested in the local history, just amateur researchers, students, educators, academic researchers, a little bit of everything. And so we organized our collections by, you've got county records, probate, circuit court, county commission, that type thing. Historic marker videos, which these are some mini documentaries that I've made that help, give information about Limestone County history. This we just added. In fact, I'm just going to give y'all a little Easter egg. I only have put one episode up so far, but this is my podcast about local history, and this is a haunted episode with ghost stories. So enjoy it afterwards. Happy Halloween. But one of the things that we do to try to make this more easy for people to navigate, a couple things. This is our little welcome. We uploaded it kind of as an asset, but really it's just directions. So saying, here's how you can use these terms, these different places and time frames to search. And then, so let's say somebody wanted to see everything that we've got tagged for African Americans. They can put that into the search field and it will bring up all types of records. We got pictures, we got videos, we've got articles. As soon as it populates, we'll have over 1,000 funeral programs. So even things like this, record books, county record books that were during segregation era. And and you can see where we've got the metadata filled out. So even with the subject, so it'll be tagged like that, even with the government records. And, you see the Dublin Core schema. And for non-government records, so this, one of my favorite collections is the Looney collection, not because he's crazy, but because his last name was Looney. And he was a Limestone County, native Shutterbug historian. Bye. And this is him. This is one of the original selfies ever. And what I love about Frank is he should have been an archivist because he wrote on the backs of all of his pictures. So as we have gone in and filled in our metadata, you can see this is what he wrote about going, a self-portrait where he went to the rode a bus and flew and everything to view the Apollo 11 launch. So that's Frank. So anyways, so that's kind of what it looks like for the public to use. But I want to show y'all now what that looks like behind the scenes. And I'll make it quick because I know it's getting towards the end of the day. Let's see. So there's our metadata plan and let's pull up this. Okay. So this is our admin side of things. And let's go to, we'll just go back to old Frank. Or the postcard collection. Postcard collection is always a favorite because there's so much metadata that's just fantastic. So this, we'll go with this one. This is actually a picture of my building back whenever it was a train depot, and somebody wrote a little note to their mom and them. So it's that's one of the postcards we've got here, and you can see how this is how we have filled in the metadata with your title and your description. A lot of that, based on what's on those postcards. Collections, rights, relations, all of that stuff. And in order, right now, I'm the only one who's really been entering this stuff in, but that will be changing. And who knows, I might not be here forever. So I wanted to make sure that this would stay consistent no matter who it's metadata schema. I guess everybody kind of knows a little bit about that if you've been doing archives for a little while. And so this is how, sorry, it's kind of hard to see with the community hub right there, but you can see that we've got a definition of each field. So, what this is, who created it, what that means. And where it really helps is with subject matters like this. So we try to think of, as we go through, and we've added to these too, as we go through everything that can relate to this particular asset. When it comes to subjects or even for government records, the type of record that we have there. And we've got additional descriptions of what all these different fields mean for us, specifically for the Limestone County Archives and the people using these records. and type, format, what they are, and coverage. So the coverage section, let me scroll on down here. So you can see there it says Athens, 1900 to 1910. So we decided with coverage to be able to tag spatial and temporal context for these. So these are the different communities that are represented in our records. There's probably a few more we haven't added in there yet. And we narrow everything down to a decade. So if somebody wanted to see every picture that we have from the 1920s or thereabouts, we'll just do a search in the admin portal. Well, I say we will. It's thinking. Let me go back to the Anyways, if we want to do a search for everything that happened in the 1920s, right? So you can just search 1920 and it will bring up. So this is really helpful when you've got, so anything that's tagged during that time is going to come up. There's the school in 1920s. Some of these are kind of, the Rolling Stores, different things like that, which is really helpful when you've got teachers teaching classes about, like 100 years ago and that type of stuff. And they can then go through here and see what all is, there's articles, there's pictures, there's records from 100 years ago. And so that has come in handy. Another one that really came in handy this past year was schools. So some of these are records that I actually will not permanently retain, but I uploaded them for this particular use case. These are all pictures related that are all tagged with the word schools. And we had some first graders who used our Limestone County Digital Archives to research and create their own exhibit about Limestone County schools then and now. So that, we're trying to, bottom line, without going into too much more, the main thing we're trying to do here is think about who's using our records and what they're using it for, and how we can facilitate that then with our digital archives. And oftentimes as people ask for things specific, we'll put that up there. But a lot of these folks are not trained historians and researchers. They're just looking for answers to questions. And so we're trying to do this the best way we can to provide those answers as well. So I think that covers everything that I had, which is great because we've got 4 minutes.
Rebecca, it's hard to believe that you started from scratch.
It's been don't look real close at my metadata in all my collections, because some of them are much more filled out than others. Postcards are great. Frank Looney, his is good. Some of these others, the information is there, which is the main thing. The main thing is we're just wanting to make sure these are preserved, because they were just hanging out on servers before we did this. So they're preserved, but little by little, as you all mentioned, you enter the metadata. Somebody's got to eventually. It's got to take human hours. You know what I mean? And so you all know what I mean. And so I do like the bulk metadata editing and the ability to just drag and drop, and so it's there even if it's not perfect.
Well, I think you've represented, beautifully the fact that archivists end up getting things that don't always come with good metadata, but that because their discipline, their passion, their mission is to provide access and to preserve, work has to be done. And I think, Tanya gave us an example of what they do up front with metadata to try to make sure that when things are flowing through. But I think you've given us a brilliant example of what can be done when you have the assets in order to facilitate access. So on behalf of Preservica and myself, I'd like to just thank all the panelists, Tanya and Rebecca and Kate, for participating, and to Nagara for giving us this chance to speak, and for everybody else hanging out on a Friday afternoon. So thank you so very much.
Yes, thank you.